right, this is John Colo with OKRaw.com. Today we have another exciting episode for you, coming at you from my beautiful backyard garden here in Las Vegas, Nevada. And I have a very important topic to discuss today. This is modern fruits of today versus wild fruits of yesteryear. You know, I know there's a lot of fruitarians out there, and I love fruitarians and I love people who eat fruit. I eat a lot of fruit myself. Today I actually had cultivated persimmons, although I also have had wild persimmons in the past, as well as some Namwa bananas, which are seedless bananas. And to remind you guys that old school bananas are actually seedless and contain a lot less fruit pulp. Nonetheless, the reason for this episode is because, you know, there's misinformation going around out there, and I don't like it. You know, and I'm here to just to share with you guys the truth. So don't shoot the messenger. I encourage you guys, if you don't believe my videos, look up everything in my videos. You'll find them to be true and accurate. You know, and I'm just here to share with you guys my thoughts, my beliefs, and my research with you so you guys could have the healthiest diet. Whether you guys want to eat tons of fruit, lots of fruit, you know, or a little fruit, or incorporate some fruit in your diets, I do want you to realize the reality between the idealistic and the realistic when it comes to fruit in terms of wild fruit and modern fruit. I had a video with Dr. Rick Dina where he mentioned wild fruit, and he seemed to get attacked in the comments, and people saying wild fruit is just like modern fruit because it's just as sweet as it was before, and all these things. And you know, I don't know where people come up with these things, and while some of it can be accurate because there are no true absolutes, yes, some wild fruit from thousands of years ago could be as sweet as modern fruit, but the fact of the matter is fruit has changed over the literally tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years we have been on the planet, and we have evolved as humans, in my opinion, to also, of course, eat a lot more than just fruit. Links down below to my video where I discuss this if you guys are more interested in how the human diet has evolved over time instead of staying the same and eating mostly fruit, although lots of leaves like apes, which is also down below in the video if you guys want to learn about what my beliefs are and the research based on the science. This episode, as a matter of fact, is based around evidence and the science, and I will be pulling up published journal scientific studies to share my thoughts and my ideas. So modern fruit versus wild fruit, which is best? That being said, you know, just because fruit of today is not the same as yesteryear doesn't mean it's bad, it's no good. It just means it's different. And my goal with this episode is to share with you guys why it's different, and then more importantly, how to fill in because it is so different than yesteryear, and how we could actually make up for the nutritional and small differences in the fruit of today than of yesteryear, okay? So anyways, let's get into this episode. All right, so the first slide I'm gonna start with today, I must give credit where credit is due. I always strive to give credit to everybody that I learned from on my journey. Once again, to remind you guys, I've been living a raw vegan lifestyle now for the last 30 years. Probably around after the 25-year mark, I started incorporating small amounts of heat processed foods into my diet so I could have the healthiest diet, because I learned personally for me, I had to gravitate away from a higher fruit diet and eat just a little bit less fruit, although I still love my fruit and usually eat one meal a day of fruit myself. And hats off to Tom Billings, who I knew many years ago, because I met him originally at the SF Life Living in Raw Foods potlucks back in the 1990s when I would attend and he would attend. And he was pretty hardcore, I thought, when I look back at Tom and what he did. And, you know, I think Tom, my personal opinion, is got himself into a box because he was really restricting what he was eating. And he was a tall, skinny, you know, guy. And it didn't work for him. And then he basically came up with this website, Beyond Vegetarianism, to basically dispute a lot of the raw food concepts. And, you know, nowadays, me looking back at what he's doing now, because when he first came out of this, I'm like, that's all BS. But now when I look back at it, I'm like, man, you know what? That guy's got some wisdom. I don't still agree with everything that he would believe or have published on that website, but definitely he makes a lot of good points. He's kind of an academic style person himself. So a lot of my episode is taken from this webpage, Wild versus Natural Fruit versus Modern and Cultivated Fruit, a summary comparison. And this is just basically old school HTML, like circa 1990s. So I've made it a lot more fun than just reading off the text there. All right, so let's continue. So basically, there's a lots of factors that make wild or natural fruit different than modern and cultivated fruit, and you can see on each side, Tom has put the different characteristics, you know, and that's what I'm going to get into. We're going to compare specific characteristics of each of the different types of fruit in terms of plant culture, breeding, genetics, nutrition, all these things. So let's get into my slides based on Tom's table here, but also I've taken it to the next level and further incorporated even further information that Tom did not. So thanks, Tom, for spurring on this episode. All right, so the first point I want to talk about is the environmental footprint, right? Most people just buy fruit at the store. They never think about what kind of environmental footprint they're having on the planet. Of course, if you're a vegan and you're an environmentalist, then you know, of course, a vegan diet that comes solely from plants is a lot smaller footprint than an animal-based diet. Of course, a whole food diet is also a less of an environmental footprint than a diet based around processed foods that have to get processed at a factory and whatnot. So nonetheless, what's the environmental footprint of like modern fruits, which is basically farm food, has higher inputs. They got to use tractors. There's people picking it. There's all kinds of things happening, you know, fertilizers, and, you know, your food has to get refrigerated, more energy consumed, right? Then shipped and then transported, you know, lots of inputs and a bigger environmental footprint, although it's still significantly less than animal foods. That being said, if we look at forage food, right? Food growing out in the forest or wild food, for example, you know, I'm planting a food forest in Puerto Rico. And when I have all my food and my trees are producing, I could just literally walk around, pick it and eat it, right? And like, I didn't even use any fertilizer. Basically, I planted in the ground's fertile, things grow. I mean, I'm here sitting in my garden, you know, I'm growing different kinds of kales and bok choys and kamatsuna, mizuna, and whatnot. And, you know, I could pick this and eat it, right? Very low environmental footprint. So I encourage you guys, if you guys are fruitarian, eat lots of fruit, plant your own fruit trees. I am filming this video right underneath a row of fig trees. I have probably about 25 fig trees in a row. I have some kumquat trees in the back, an olive tree that still has olives hanging on it for this year, goji berry shrubs. You know, I grow some of my own fruit, but I grow a lot more of my own vegetables. So, right, you know, big difference between conventionally grown modern fruit versus wild fruit back in yesteryear. I mean, think about the apes and the monkeys in the forest. You know, they're not going to the store and buying their fruit, right? This is very unnatural. All right, next up, we got hybridization and genetics, okay? So in nature, there would be trees growing and natural hybrids occur when, you know, things get cross-pollinated, right? And then trees will come up. And then you're going to have a high genetic diversity within regions where those fruits cross-pollinate, or even your vegetables, right? Meanwhile, when we're eating food from the store, you know, it's basically crosses that man-made for man-made reasons. So some parthenocopic seedless lines, limited gene editing, GM cultivars, and a few fruits, such as they are GM editing these days, tomatoes, zucchinis, papayas. Now, even that pink pineapple that you may have seen, it costs like 20 bucks. Those are genetically modified. I am against GMO, genetically modified. I'm for 100% natural hybrids, okay? So yeah, I want you guys to realize this. And when man breeds food, right, do we breed it for nutrition? No, generally not. We breed it for being able to be shipped and trucked, because that is, and not going bad and being able to be picked early, because that's what the farmers want, so that they don't lose their profit. Because to remind you guys, the whole system of the produce industry is not there for your health, right? It is there to create profit for the owners, right? When I grow my own food, I'm not doing this for profit. I really don't sell any of my food. It's all for personal consumption. So I do extra things to grow higher quality food. And when you're out in nature, right, you have hopefully better, more fertile soil that's just been sitting there years and years without being tilled, that's adding natural fertilizer back, which we'll be discussing in a minute, that's even more nutritious than modern fruit that is not hybridized and has, you know, natural hybrids versus, you know, man-made hybrids for specific reasons. Next up, let's talk about how these plants are propagated, you know. So in the wild, right, I have had trees on my property that my friend threw over jackfruit seeds on the ground. And then the seed just came up and now I have trees on my property. So propagation is from seed or natural vegetation spread. And then that's in the wild, and in man-made conditions or monoculture or farming, they're mostly clonal. So to get the same exact variety of that Keat mango or that lemon zest mango that you love so much because they're so sweet, or to have the same exact variety of apple, they basically cut a branch off the tree, which you can see maybe here. They cut the branch off the tree and basically stick it in the ground. It grows new roots in the case of a fig, or they basically put it on a different rootstock so they have the exact clone. So if it's like you took me and you could clone me and made 1,000 million Johns, which would be crazy, I'd be identical. And then unfortunately there are, negative things to doing that. And so it's just totally not natural how the farming system works, how we make basically carbon copies of trees and make thousands of them. So it's through grafting, budding, and cutting. It's apples, citrus, mangoes, grapes, bananas. All these trees are only here because we propagated them to be. Otherwise, there'd be, in many cases, one of the same exact kind of tree. The tree would make seeds, the seeds would drop, and then there would be basically offsprings of that particular type of tree. I mean, of course, there's exceptions where some trees drop seeds and they're tree to seed, but most trees are not, because they want to have a genetic diversity and create all different kinds of fruits and resilience. All right, so the next thing I want to discuss is the root system and how the fruit trees are grown. So in nature, the tree would basically, the seed would drop in the ground, it would grow, the roots would form, the roots would go into the ground, it would send the shoot up, and it'd send the tree up, right? Meanwhile, when you are talking about grafted trees, which are basically most of the fruit that you guys are eating are from grafted fruit trees, apples, peaches, mangoes. A lot of trees are from grafted nursery stock. They basically just take, once again, they take a branch off one tree, they cut it, and then they basically, append it onto a rootstock from a totally different tree. So they grow a tree from a seed, or they, that's maybe a different variety that's maybe more stable, that maybe grows faster, that's more resilient. And they basically cut that tree off so it no longer lives, and then they put the new, top growth or the scion wood on top to make a new tree. So it's while it does work, and plenty of trees are, grafted this way, it's not entirely natural. If man was not involved, all these natural grafts would not have occurred, So whether that's good or bad, I'm not gonna, put a judgment on that, but know that modern trees are grown a lot different than how they would grow in nature. And if we all ascribe to eat a natural diet, the fruit that you're eating is not being necessarily grown the most natural ways. All right, cropping system. How are wild foods grown versus modern food? So foods at your grocery store, right? Somebody's just not going around the forest and picking one or two of these and then selling it. No, your fruit is being grown in a monoculture. Probably one of the worst monocultures, in my opinion, are the bananas, which are probably one of the most eaten fruits. I mean, basically there's just fields and fields of bananas. One banana plant basically produces one rack of bananas. Then basically you cut it down, then the next one has to come up and take its place. And then, so it's basically all monoculture. This is not healthy for the environment, okay? And then in natural systems, like in my forest in Puerto Rico, link down below to that video if you guys want to see how I'm planting out my forest with all different kinds of fruit trees. Along forest edges, agroforestry, and there's mixed ecology. So there's not just only cacao, trees. I planted cacao mixed in with the junk random trees I have that are overstored. I planted in miracle berries and coffee and, chirimoya. I planted atamoyas, I planted jackfruit, all mixed in amongst the forest. So like my plants have lots of different friends, and they're not all the same kind of clone or the same exact monoculture. Once again, the way food is produced in this modern age is a lot different than nature. And when you're growing in monoculture, there could be a lot of issues with that. There's gonna be less genetic diversity and microbial diversity in the soil because, the trees and the roots only feed certain kinds of soil bacteria. And in an agroforestry system, there's a much more diversity of the microbes, which can create greater resilience and, dare I say, even higher quality food. All right, so talking about resilience, right, here we go, resilience. Wild fruits are more ecologically robust. Why? Because they have to fend for themselves out in the wild. Also, too, bugs and pests may not find that one miracle berry tucked in between all these other fruits. But when you have a whole field full of miracle berries every 10 feet or mangoes every 10 feet apart, right? If a bacteria gets to one, it could then jump to the other one. That's where they have like the citrus greening disease in Florida, where basically they're wiping out the citrus trees over there. And so cultivated fruits and monocultures are vulnerable. Have you heard that the original banana, which is the Gros Michel banana, was literally wiped out? So we had to stop selling Gros Michel bananas, and then they found the Cavendish variety, which is the common banana that is sold in grocery stores. But now they're saying the Cavendish variety is susceptible to some kind of disease, and we may not have those real soon. But yet the whole, banana market is based around the Cavendish, which I hate unless they're like, grown well, because they're always picked too early. And so monocultures are vulnerable. So your food supply is vulnerable when you leave it up to somebody else when they are growing in monoculture. That's why if you guys are, into fruit, eating a fruit-based diet, highly encourage you guys, buy some land, plant your own fruit trees so you get out ultimate resilience and you could eat more wild type fruits and not the stuff you buy at the store, which is so much different than how it would be in nature. Next up, we got water, all right? In my farm in Puerto Rico, right? If it's not raining or the soil hasn't collected and stored the rain, right, because of the organic matter and the clay soil, then my trees don't get watered, right? In a monoculture, in fields, in farms, right? Yes, it does rain and they get some water, but mostly, a lot of arid areas are used to grow crops, such as the Central Valley, which, doesn't get rain for pretty much most of the summer. And then they have to irrigate, right? If they didn't irrigate, the trees would be gone. Think almonds. Almonds can use lots of water up to create the almonds that you like to eat. So yeah, it's not a totally sustainable way to be growing trees not in their natural environment. Monoculture all next to each other that are literally sucking up water, where they also, spray Roundup down below. Don't let the weeds, don't cover the ground with any kind of mulch to keep the water in, right? Or leave a canopy of bigger trees over them to keep the water in. The water evaporates and they must use lots of water. This is a very inefficient use of water, in my opinion. Next up is seasonality. This is a fun one, guys. Most of you guys never realize this. Cultivated fruits, when is apple season, right? A good raw vegan, somebody into fruit would know the apple season, when apples are in season, Apples are in season generally in the fall. Here in the Southwest, we could have apples as early as late summer through some of the winter, depending on where you live. And then they go into cold storage, right? They go into cold storage where it's oxygen deprived, and then they basically keep those apples cold, and apples are an excellent storage fruit. That's why we have them year round, and they could pull them anytime out of the fridge and then sell them. They're still nice and crisp because they've been stored in an oxygen deprived environment. So they basically are in suspended animation. That is not completely natural. The apples don't have as much life force as when you pluck it off the tree and eat it fresh yourself, but yet many people don't even know apple season. And there's a lot of fruits that are like this, that are literally, you could buy bananas 365 days a year at your local grocery store. You could buy pineapples 365 days at your local grocery store. Oranges, you could buy 365 days at your local grocery store. And besides just being stored, in unnatural ways, the other thing about, the fruits is that cultivated fruits, they're always in season because they're shipped literally globally around the world. If it's not persimmon season here, it's persimmon season in Israel or Spain. They're importing Israeli and Spanish persimmons this time of year. I've seen them at my local markets. They're quite expensive and, in my opinion, quite tasteless. So don't waste your money. But there's less seasonality of fruits because everything's going to be always available. Because once again, it's about dollars and cents. They're going to find ways to store it. They're going to find ways to ship it so you could have it year round. So they could basically fleece you of your money. Whereas wild fruits, right, are strictly seasonal. My fig trees, there's no leaves on it right now. They're just sticks out of the ground, and they're not going to be even producing until a little bit into summer, late summer. And I just get figs once a year, and that's when I enjoy and love my figs. So, I think a lot of people, once again, we miss the seasonality. Actually, there's figs in the markets at the at the supermarkets these days are actually imported from Mexico, and they are irradiated, something I do not recommend you guys eat. But yeah, we have to remember that wild fruits be strictly seasonal. This would also encourage us to eat a diversity of food because we would only be eating what is in season. And so that's why it's so important to have your own fruit trees. Also visit local farmers markets where the farmers actually grow and pick the fruit near you, and are not just simply resellers selling things they bought wholesale and posing and being a poser and posing as a farmer when they're really just a reseller and you could have just went to the supermarket instead. All right, next up is environmental impact. This is huge, guys. I mean, this is what really bothers me about industrial grown fruit. And every time you guys buy industrial grown fruit, you support this, okay? So wild fruits preserve rainforest. You know, I bought literally a undeveloped land in Puerto Rico. It is literally a forest, and I'm selectively cutting down some trees to make room for my fruit trees. Meanwhile, all the other trees that are super huge and tall, I'm not cutting down because they are acting as protection for my fruit trees when they are young and they don't have their roots established. They haven't gotten so deep. The larger trees also protect the soil from getting the sun, so the water does not evaporate and the soil microbiology could stay at its peak tip top, right? And so wild fruits preserve rainforest, preserve the forest, preserve nature when agroforestry is done or things are just going, you know, in the wild. Meanwhile, they are cutting down rainforests to grow modern fruits. Just look at the avocados that you buy imported from Mexico. Everybody has avocado toast these days. Avocado is such the rage. But the fact of the matter is, there are literally cartels running avocados and cutting down forests so they could have more space to plant avocados and make money from it and literally, in my opinion, exploit the earth, right? I know a lot of vegans are concerned about exploiting animals, but you know, I'm also under the impression that it's very important not to exploit the earth, and we are draining the earth of its resources, including rainforests, as well as, more importantly, the nutrients in the soil. Right when they cut down that rainforest, they plant those avocado trees. The first few years of avocados, you know, harvest and yields are going to do great because the avocado trees are extracting all that nutrition in the soil. But once, after a couple years, all that nutrition is extracted, right? Then the growth goes down. Then the farmer has to bring in a lot of inputs because they're taking off thousands of pounds of avocados, but they're not putting the, you know, trace minerals and nutrients back in the soil like they should be. So, you know, and like all the banana plantations that are just growing monocultures and acres of bananas so you guys could eat your 30 bananas a day, right? This is not good for the environmental impact, you know? So once again, I encourage you guys to take some responsibility for the food you eat, whether you want to grow vegetables like I do or even fruits like I do. Grow some of your own food. You're going to preserve nature and the environment. Next up is fruit size, right? This is another big one. People don't get this, right? Wild fruits are typically smaller. Not in all cases, but I would say in most cases, wild fruits are smaller. You guys are going to see some examples of this in just a little bit in this episode. And of course, cultivated fruits are typically larger because, you know, things sell for by the pound and they want fruits as large as possible, where they want to plump them up due to the genetics, which of course, now you're basically trading maybe nutrition for, you know, larger fruits with more flesh area and less skin area. And let me remind you guys that the skin area is one of the area where generally, you know, there's more phytochemicals and nutrition in the skin than in the fruit flesh. I'm just thinking like nice, large Honeycrisp apples. I mean, I did buy a couple the other day, okay? So yeah. Wild fruits typically smaller, cultivated fruits typically larger. Next up, we got fertilizer. So with wild fruits, right, how do they get fertilized, right? Are there fertilizers pixies, you know, Tinkerbells spreading fertilizer dust all over the forest? No, that does not happen at all. What happens in the forest is the leaves drop. The leaves basically act as fertilizer and nutrition for the trees in the forest. You know, fruits, the birds eat some of the fruits will end up dropping on the ground. Birds and animals will basically eat the fruits and then poop on the ground. All that basically turns into compost, which then feeds the trees. Of course, also, most forests are undercover, you know, so the sun's not hitting it and degrading the land, degrading the soil. Trees, when they get old, they drop, and all the carbon is then returned into the soil, creating a nice fungal dominated compost. And so wild fruits are grown with nature's natural recycling system, natural fertilizers, compost, whereas cultivated fruits are using man-made fertilizers, whether it's chemical fertilizers made from natural gas, if you're buying conventional fruits, or even if it's organic fruits, they're probably putting factory farmed manure that hopefully has been composted properly so that you don't have E. coli outbreaks on your fruits and vegetables. And then, it's contaminated, in my opinion, because they're feeding all the animals lots of things that they shouldn't be, GMO and sprayed crops, and even growing food for animals with biosolids from things that went down the sink, in cities. And then there's like PFOAs and all kinds of crazy stuff in there. So there's basically man-made fertilizers in cultivated fruits. And this is a huge problem. Nobody discusses this, right? We just think, oh, fruits are fruits. They're great. They got the nutrition they should have. No, they don't. I've been looking into this for a long time, and modern fruits are very imbalanced in the minerals they contain, as well as other properties that you'll learn about in just a little bit in this episode. And once again, bringing in man-made fertilizers is not sustainable. It's a much huger environmental impact. Now we have factories making these, industrial fertilizers at great environmental expense. All right, so now let's talk about the definition of natural and wild fruit. By definition, natural and wild fruit survives and reproduces in real nature. In the wild, survival of the fittest. This is Darwin's principle, survival of the fittest, right? If fruit's occurring in nature on its own, it's had to survive the thousands of years on its own. Without fertilizer pixies, without anybody spraying pesticide to kill the bugs, without herbicides being sprayed at the base, it has to send its roots down deep so it can get the water, especially when it doesn't rain. Meanwhile, modern or cultivated fruit, strains can survive only under human protection. Cultivated fruit generally cannot survive or produce, in the wild, right? They need to be basically pampered like a baby because the genetics are not as strong. That's not a trait that farmers care about, the plant being strong, because they are there to take care of it. Once again, they care mostly about profits, so they care about shippability, hopefully a little bit about the flavor and the taste, because the better it tastes, generally the better it sells, especially if the taste is good when you pick it unripe so it can ship and doesn't go bad. My figs in my right here that I'm sitting underneath, right? If you pick them and they're ripe, they don't last long. I mean, they're just so tender and soft. They have a thinner skin and they'll mush and they'll go bad. So yeah, survival of fittest, wild fruit is a lot more stronger. And guess what? Why is a wild fruit stronger, right? It's stronger because it has all these different polyphenols, antioxidants, different nutrients that basically make it stronger and make it survive. And genetics, of course, that make it survive over the long run. And cultivated fruit, it's not necessarily the strongest or the fittest. So next up, let's talk about the climate range that fruit can be grown. So if you're talking about wild fruits, then it's restricted to native ranges. Apples, I think, originally from like the Middle East, China area. And so, but nowadays we grow them in Washington State, grows a lot. I mean, they could be grown most places in the United States, actually. Meanwhile, cultivated fruit can be extended via breeding, rootstocks, greenhouse tunnels, and controlled chilling. So, a lot of fruits may need some chill hours, right, to produce fruit. So that's why, like here in the Southwest, you don't find a ton of cherry trees, because cherries generally need more chill hours than we have, especially this year. It's barely been cold, and that may hurt fruit production for this year on some varieties that need a certain amount of chill hours. But then basically they take genetics and find basically types of fruits or cultivars that need less chill hours. Of course, you could also grow things in greenhouses and tunnels to basically create your own weather system. So you could have fruits year round. I know people in Colorado that grow citrus literally in the snow in their greenhouse, their thermal greenhouse all year. So, there's ways that, while man-made gets into breeding, they also can control the climate and do things to make fruits available and being able to be monocultured farmed in certain areas where they wouldn't otherwise be able to grow. So this is not completely natural. That's why I like to travel. And when I travel, I eat fruits that are in season in the area that I'm traveling to. I just got back from a trip from Florida, got some Canistell egg fruit, local grown bananas, papayas, as well as lots of sapodillas, which is my favorite. Next up, plant size and training, okay? In the wild, fruit trees can be huge, right? They stay huge. Nobody's trimming them, nobody's pruning them back. It's unmanaged canopy. Meanwhile, when they're growing for production, growing for farmed, right? They grow them on dwarf trees. They keep them small. They can be grown on a root stock that keeps the tree small. So it's literally, you're limiting the growth of the tree because of the root stock doesn't allow it to get big or it'll grow slower. And they're trained for light and easy harvest. So they're constantly cut back to a certain height so that they could be harvested and harvested easily. So we're basically training the tree how we want the tree to grow for our benefit versus how the tree wants to grow for its benefit, okay? Some of you guys, this may not matter, but I visited a wise fruit farmer in Hawaii, and we talked about this, and even to this day, I try to barely trim my fruit trees, and I let them grow how they want to grow, not how I want them to grow, unless my neighbor's complaining at me. then I got to trim my trees. All right, next up is pollination. This is another fun one here. Most people never consider this. So in the wild, right, if you're foraging your fruit, growing your fruit in an agroforestry system, right? Native insects, birds and bats would pollinate your fruit. Some trees may be self-fertile, of course, but under farming and modern crops, right, there's a mix. Some are self-fertile, some there's native pollinators. Sometimes they rent honeybees, right, such as the almond production, right? They have honeybees that literally get trucked in from Florida because it's warm that time of year. And, the bees are not fully out of hibernation yet. And at the loss of thousands of bees lose their lives in transport and because they're literally being displaced from their original home to use as a pollinator for almonds and other stone fruits, okay? And then, of course, some fruit trees must be hand pollinated, or fruit crops. Maybe dragon fruit comes to mind as something that has to be hand pollinated quite often. And furthermore, in standard industrial agriculture, right, they may be spraying things like imocloprid, right? So they're spraying things that may kill bees. The bees are not the intended target, but the intended target are other insects. But, other pollinators can also be affected by many pesticides because pesticides generally are not specific to any specific insect. It's maybe specific to their nervous system. And bees are losing their lives and other pollinators are losing their lives due to pesticide spraying. So I want you guys to consider this if you want to consider, where your food comes from, and once again, the environmental impact, and more importantly, the environmental impact to other creatures, including the insects on our planet. Next up is ripening biology. This is another fun one. Once again, most people never consider this, so on my fruit trees in Puerto Rico, my fruit is ripened on the plant. Drop fruit is common. Some fruit is maybe best picked right before it drops, otherwise it can be bad. But in general, when things are grown on farms, they have to pick it generally early. Have you ever how many times have you gotten papaya from the grocery store that tastes as good as one that you had fresh picked in the tropics? Not too often, guys. I mean, I've had the best papayas that are tree ripened in the tropics. Anyways, for, store-bought fruits, it's species dependent, climatic picked, mature green, then ethylene ripened for many different crops. I mean, bananas just come to mind. Most pineapples are picked green. They don't really ripen off the plant. I mean, some fruits may get a bit sweeter, but it's not technically ripening. All the nutrition has gone into the plant, and unless it's like a starchy plant that then converts the carbohydrates into sugars, like bananas, things don't generally get sweeter. They just maybe get softer and go through an enzymatic process and may get riper, as we call it, but it's never going to be as ripe as if they ripened on the tree. So this happens to a lot of crops where they're just picked too early. I mean, tomatoes come to mind a lot there. They can be picked green to a certain extent, and then they'll, turn red over time. But once again, the flavor is just missing. Post-harvest, another good one. I've looked in post-harvest many times over the years. Post-harvest practices play a key factor in how long the food, whether it's fruits or vegetables, can store after they're harvested. So, if you're wild harvesting food, like in my forest, right? You pick it off the ground, you eat it. You pick it off the tree, you eat it. Maybe you can put it in your fridge for a day or two, but then it's going to go bad. Meanwhile, industrial farming has systems, basically pick the crop. I mean, I have cauliflower right next to me, and when cauliflower is picked in the field, it basically goes into hydro cooling. So they drop the temperature on it super low to kind of lock in the freshness so that it doesn't go bad, doesn't spoil. And they keep it in cold chain, which means it's under refrigeration for the entire duration. Every time it goes into a different truck or warehouse, it's under refrigeration at a certain temperature so that it stays the freshest the longest. So they research the temperatures to keep produce the longest. If you guys are curious about that, links down below to my video where I reveal all the temperatures to store your fruits and vegetables, the same temperatures that industry does, so that they stay fresher longer, so you don't have fruit going bad or vegetables going bad when you buy them in bulk like I do. And if you want to buy in bulk, link down below where I show you guys how to get the cheapest prices in Los Angeles at the produce terminal. Nonetheless, after post-harvest, cold chain control, then they have atmospheric storage where they basically, even in apples and probably some other fruits, will remove the oxygen content out of the warehouse so that the apples will store significantly longer. They have other tricks that industry will do, such as coating the different fruits with, whether it's wax, could be an animal-based wax, plant-based wax, or even new coatings such as the A-peel that many people are not a fan of, right? They do a lot of things to make the fruit stay fresher for longer, including one of those that I hate post-harvest treatments is irradiation. That basically kills all the bacteria, kills a lot of the fruit, in my opinion, and basically just at that point, it starts to rot, but then it's a controlled rot because it rots a lot slower than it would of otherwise if it did have all the bacteria on there that the irradiation is basically killing. So yeah, I really discourage you guys from eating irradiated fruit. They're irradiating more and more things. Let's see, I recently saw the figs being irradiated, but I knew that there's a new one that I just took a picture of. I know they're irradiating some mangoes are being irradiated now. Guavas have been irradiated. Let's see, longons irradiated. I think, I saw lychees imported from Australia are irradiated. They'll only mention this on the box and never at the point of sale. Some vendors will put basically irradiated symbols on the fruit when you buy it, but you always have to look at the box. So basically, at risk are things that are imported. Unless it's grown in Hawaii, it's generally not going to be irradiated if it's grown in the United States, but there's certain select fruits from Mexico can be irradiated as well as from the tropics. Okay. Next up is pesticides, right? In nature, in the wild, right? There's no pesticides, right? The plant creates its own plant defense chemicals, right? The plants have to defend themselves against pests, bugs, and disease. They've had to do this the millions of years they've been on the planet, right? When they're in their natural habitat, they've learned to deal with all the bugs and pests and disease in their natural habitat. When we take a tree and bring it to another place in the world, right, then they have different pest pressures that they're not used to, right? Which is most crops in the world are being grown not where they were originally conceived on the planet, but in some new location. And then the plants don't have the plant defense chemicals against the new bugs in that area. So then we have synthetic or organic controls that must be used to kill the bugs. This is very unnatural, and I'm highly concerned about pesticide residues. I've done several videos on pesticide residues. I'm currently researching another one. Links down below to my video on how to reduce your risk as a raw vegan who eats copious amounts of fruits and vegetables. Fruits and vegetables are probably the top sprayed plant foods that people eat. And so you guys are particularly at risk. And I know there's a lot of raw vegans that just buy conventional stuff, and that's up to you, but at least be smart about it. At least, look up the clean 15 and the dirty dozen and try to avoid the dirty dozen foods, the foods that have been proven to have the most pesticide residues. It's the accumulation over time of these residues that I believe can cause issues, not a one-time occurrence unless you're, somebody working on the farm that is basically applying them, okay? But yeah, this is a huge difference. And the other thing is when we apply pesticides to plants, the plants get weaker, right? The plants are weaker because now they don't have to produce the plant defense chemicals to protect themselves. They're like, oh, no pests are eating me, so I don't have to create any plant defense chemicals. Once again, these plant defense chemicals are also known in my book as phytonutrients or nutrients for us. So once again, this makes a very weak fruit or vegetable that has less nutrition, than wild fruits and vegetables that have to literally fend for themselves in nature. Next up are seeds. I mean, how many of you guys love you a watermelon that is seedless, right? That's a new modern invention. As a kid, we didn't have seedless watermelons. Nonetheless, in wild fruits, there's often many and larger seeds, right? Because why? Because the tree produces the fruit, not so that you could eat the fruit, so that it can reproduce, because it wants to make lots of seeds. Hopefully some mammal or creature will eat the fruit, get some of the seeds, and then poop out the seeds. They'll go right through you, and then they'll grow into new trees and new plants. Meanwhile, man has developed seedless fruits because seeds are a pain in the butt when you're eating them. You got to spit them out, or you got to chew them up for the nutrition, and nobody likes to do that. So, nowadays we have seedless pineapples, seedless bananas, seedless watermelons. They're making a lot of new seedless fruits, a lot of seedless citrus these days. Citrus can be quite seedy, and there's fewer and smaller seeds, many seedless cultivars these days. Once again, this is not natural how fruit would have been thousands of years ago. Next up is sugars. Most of you guys don't want to hear this. If you guys stuck to this part, I commend you for staying to hearing what I'm saying, because once again, I've been doing this 31 years. I've researched it all, and now I want to give back and show you guys what I've learned, because nobody considers these fine points that could end up biting you in the butt, in my personal opinion. Maybe you're not going to be bit in the butt by this, but my personal opinion, it will bite you in the butt like it bites many, like I have seen over my last 31 years of having many friends who are raw vegans and having problems with this specifically. All right, so wild fruits are mostly glucose and fructose with little sucrose. This is the balance of sugars. Those are the different kinds of sugars, right? Glucose, fructose, and sucrose. Cultivated fruits are much higher in sucrose and typically sweeter, right? Very important distinction. We're going to go over a published study on why this matters in a little bit. And I know there's some raw vegans that add white sugar to their smoothies because a fruit is not sweet enough. And I definitely don't recommend that. White sugar or sucrose is not healthy. I wouldn't say eating agave syrup, which is high in fructose, is healthy either. We want to have these sugars in their most natural form, and their most natural form is in literally wild fruits, not the cultivated fruits of today that have basically, I would say, perturbed levels of different kinds of sugars. Plant breeders don't look into different kinds of sugars when they're breeding plants. They could care less. They just want the consumer to taste good so that they sell it, so that they sell more fruit, and the fruits are nice and large. Next up is the fiber. Wild fruits often contain very high fiber, and cultivated fruits typically lower fiber. Now, you will find exceptions to this, of course, and of course, including in the fiber. If there's more seeds, that would be more fiber automatically in the fruit. If there's more skin area, typically that is going to be more fibrous, in the fruit as well. So, once again, also too, some people are going to pick this presentation apart. John, that's not true because this. And, you could find holes in this because, once again, I'm saying in general, all these things are true. I'm not saying fiber is always going to be more or sugars are always going to be more, but in general, right, these things are true. And it's something I want you to be aware of so you can plan accordingly if you think it may be a problem. Maybe right now I'm just planting a seed in your brain because for you guys, fruits is doing good. But in the future, if it doesn't do good for you any longer, then you could think back to this video and then you'll know the exact reasons why it's not, working for you. This is why I have my YouTube channel, so I could spread information that literally nobody else is. So if you guys appreciate this information, want me to do more episodes like this where I do deep dives that nobody else does, thumbs up this video. More importantly, share this with other raw vegans so they could have awareness about this, so that they don't get bit in the butt like I've seen a lot of my friends and people I've known over the years get bit in the butt. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and click that notification bell so you get notified as my new videos come out. Thank you so much. Let's continue. Next up, phytochemicals. This is probably the most important thing for me, guys. I've learned that, one of the main reasons why a raw vegan diet works, if you guys want the reason why a raw vegan diet works, all the reasons, thanks to James Sheridan, spread that video on, link down below, because he brought this into my consciousness originally, is the phytochemicals. These are the nutrients in the fruits that give us the health benefit. It's not the sugar in the fruits that give us the health benefits. It's all these phytochemicals, the fiber, and all the other components of the fruit. And so modern fruits are bred for sweetness, any phytochemicals that happen to be in there are a bonus, right? Because that's not why they're breeding them. There's a few breeders that are breeding for phytochemicals, but they are a rare breed, literally. I've met a few in the past, but most of them are breeding just for the flavor and the disease resistance, for shippability of the fruits, for example, in modern industrial farming. Meanwhile, wild fruits have distinctive profiles. They have bitters, they have tannins, they have pigments, and they're adapted to local ecology. And once again, when they are grown in nature, right, the plant has to make their plant defense chemicals, which are often the phytochemicals. If you see behind me, over on this side, you guys can see I have some purple Mizuna or Ms. America, one of my favorite things to grow in my winter garden. It is purple, right? The purple not only acts as a sunblock, right, but also protects it from, pests and diseases, right? This is why rich, deep, colorful fruits are a lot healthier than pale looking fruits. Next up is food safety. So in nature, right, we could get, bird droppings on our fruits. So you got to make sure they're clean when you eat them. But in nature, there's minimal sanitation. Their fruits have been adapted to local ecology, and things are fairly clean that I've seen over the many years. Although I did wild harvest some cactus fruits once and got really sick for like a few days, which was not fun. Meanwhile, when you get things for industrial agriculture, they're in regulated pack houses, right? They kill the microbiome of the fruit skin and microbes on the skin because they consider every bacteria is bad. They are now pasteurizing, of course, things like almonds. They've also been pasteurizing pistachios, and now I just saw walnuts being pasteurized the other day. Irradiation, in my opinion, is a type of pasteurization where they basically kill all the living bacteria on the crop so there is not outbreaks, right? This is destroying the microbiome of the fruit, which I've also researched. I will have a video about one of these days because nobody's discussed this point either. Anyways, they wash, cull, and they also trace. So there is some level of greater food safety, although there always seems to be an outbreak every few years of, cantaloupes and getting E. coli, or some leafy greens and lettuce, E. coli due to the, processing of the fruit or vegetable, or due to, using improperly, composted manures or raw manures on the fields. So yeah, the food safety, I trust the food I grow so much more than the food that I buy at the grocery store, because once again, you don't know who's been touching it. Also too, you don't know what they're spraying on it, what kind of anti-whatever bacterial sprays, which is totally not natural, can affect the microbiome of the fruit and vegetable, and also therefore affect your personal health because things aren't as natural as they should be. Next up is genetic diversity. This is super critical and important. I encourage you guys to eat a diversity of fruits and vegetables. And in the wild, they have high in genetic diversity in wild populations, because literally the cacao, tree, my cacao trees will basically make a fruit. The fruit will drop, the seeds will splatter, they'll come up, and each cacao seed that makes a fruit, that makes a new fruit tree, is now different genetics. It's basically, it has its parents. Like if I had children with a lady, we would have kids that would have basically be not me or not be my partner, right? And this is how a lot of fruit trees work, where there's going to be different genetics, and over succession years, there's going to be a field of all different interrelated crops, but they're going to be a little bit different. Meanwhile, when you go to retail and industrial grown food, retail is dominated by a few cultivars. There's germplasm banks and breeding programs. So for example, if you go buy an avocado at the store, 99 times out of 100, it will be a Hass avocado, right? They're not even labeled Hass, it just says avocado, and you just get a Hass, right? Right now in season are the Florida avocados. They used to be called Florida Booth avocados, but now they're sometimes coming from Dominica. They're nice fat avocados that are a little bit more watery. But aside from that, there's people like Ken Love that took pictures of all the different avocado cultivars in Hawaii, like an amazing poster, right? With like over 100 different types of avocados just grown in Hawaii. And there's like hundreds more even grown around the world, right? And so we are losing genetic diversity, and industry is favoring certain genetics that produce well, that customers demand. People don't like these watery style avocados. They don't sell well compared next to a Hass. A lot of the avocados have some Mexican thin skin avocados. You could actually eat the skin. It tastes kind of like licorice, actually. I love it so much. You could also eat the leaves of this particular avocado when they're young, tree. But we are losing diversity because this kind of, avocado would go bad fast because it has a thinner skin. If you're lucky and live in California, maybe you could find like the Zutano or Fuerte or Bacon avocados during maybe like the fall season. If you're in Florida, maybe you could find other kinds, or if you grow your own fruit trees, of course, you have a wealth of diversity at your fingertips. And once again, when you are a slave to the store, you are limiting your diversity of food, which also, of course, limits your nutrition as well as phytonutrients, and also, limits the resilience of these fruit farms in the future. If something attacks the Hass avocados, like all those fields in Mexico where they're basically cutting down the rainforest and putting monocultures of Hass avocados, right? There won't be any avocados because we're losing genetic diversity. Everybody's pulling out their Fuerte trees, which in my opinion is a better avocado than the Hass, to put in the Hass, which I think is really sad. So, most people never consider this, and I want you guys to consider this as somebody who eats lots, or hopefully is eating lots of fruit. Right, next up is resilience, right? This is also very important. Monocultures can be vulnerable. It has happened in the past, so we look at history at the Gros Michel banana that literally got wiped out. That was the main type of banana that was grown and sold until it got wiped out from disease. And then now we replace that with the Cavendish, and experts are saying the Cavendish is under threat. And, the citrus industry in Florida, once again, looking at history, right, got the citrus greening disease that now is being literally wiped out because it's monocultures, right? If trees are interplanted and we have different genetics, they can be a lot more resilient. That's why ecologically robust where they're native and low inputs and variable yields in the wild. Once again, encourage you guys to grow your own fruit trees, invest in your own property, invest in your own land to grow your own fruit trees, so you can plant a food forest that has a diversity of fruits and vegetables growing. All right, so we're getting near the end, but basically, wild and natural fruit are tied to natural seasonal cycles, and modern cultivated fruit may be independent of natural seasons. So now we're basically eating bananas in the winter when we wouldn't necessarily be eating tons of bananas in the winter. Even in the tropics, when it's a little bit cooler, the bananas slow down and don't produce as much. Same thing with coconuts and a lot of other fruits in the tropics, such as cacao, that you wouldn't eat as much. Nonetheless, we just totally lost the seasonability of fruits and vegetables and plant food. So I always encourage you guys to eat as much seasonal foods as you can. That's why I grow a garden. I eat as much as I can out of my garden. If I want to eat things that are not in season here, I'll get on an airplane and go to where they are in season, where they are fresh, of course. But, I want you guys to try to eat more seasonally. That's very important. Eat more greens in the wintertime when there wouldn't be a lot of fruits. Maybe, eat some tropical greens in the summertime when all the cold season greens are not in season. It's very important, guys, to, tie yourself, to a greater extent to the seasonality of foods, but not just be only eating seasonal. I think that could also be detrimental. Next up is, of course, survival of the fittest. This is very important. Natural and wild food is stronger, and modern cultivated food needs human protection and is weaker. Do you want to have stronger fruit or weaker fruit? This is why I love growing my own fruit, because basically I don't spray my fruit trees with anything. They have to fend for themselves, and I get to eat the amazing fruit that just tastes so much better. All right, here's another one. I just talked to somebody actually at the one of the festivals I went to recently, and she was telling me about wild durian. I've never had, well, I did have wild durian actually when I got it shipped to me from the durian writer, Lindsay, frozen, and link down below to that video where I review it, compared to the cultivated Monthong durian. So it's highly unfortunate that basically wild durian, durians in the wild and literally rainforest is being cut down by people in the areas where they grow because, they don't see a value in them because the Monthong durian sells for money. And if they grew Monthong trees, they could make more money, and people don't, appreciate the wild grown fruit. So every time you basically buy cultivated fruit, you are supporting the industry that basically is chopping down rainforests. This is why I strongly encourage you guys to always try and seek out new and different varieties and support small local farmers that are growing unique varieties that are not available commercially. And literally wild durian trees are getting cut down because they are not being appreciated, right? People that are durian connoisseurs, right? Like the Monthong, they're not really the biggest fan. They really are into the wild durians because they have all different kinds of flavors. They're extremely pungent. They have lower flesh yield. They're tolerant of diseases, where the Monthong has a milder odor, higher flesh yield, right? So that means more fruit flesh, susceptible to disease. Most people never consider this. And this is just one type of fruit. And there's so many kinds of fruit that this is occurring to, so I'm glad for Lindsay and the Durian writer, link down below to the video I made tasting the fruits that she is able to source from literally the wild, and support her and her mission to keep wild durian trees growing. Some of these trees are quite old school, and it's really sad to me when these old school trees are getting cut down for new modern varieties that are simply just blah. That's how I'd say it. The complexity and flavors in wild durian is just insane. And you got to go to like Thailand and go on a trip with Lindsay, the Durian writer, to see for yourself if you guys really love your durian, and stop buying the cultivated Monthong. I put my nose up to Monthong every time I see it. All right. Now, another one, a lot of you guys aren't going to like this. We're going to talk about mangoes. I know a lot of you guys love mangoes. Mangoes are the #1 fruit in the world, and we're going to talk about wild versus modern mangoes. So wild mangoes were eaten in salads, pickles, and chutneys. When they usually do pickles and chutneys, that means those fruits are not that sweet. Maybe they're very fibrous. There's a full range of flavors, and they've been using them for hundreds of years. Meanwhile, modern mango cultivars are sweeter and less fibrous, right? Nobody likes when the mangoes get stuck in their teeth, so now they bred the fiber out of them. Literally, this is totally true. They're more prone to disease. My favorite variety, Paul Nissan, will say, the lemon zest, don't plant it, it's gonna get disease. So, I gotta prove them wrong. So going back to Puerto Rico to see, because it tastes amazing. I'm not gonna say it doesn't, and I do eat some modern mangoes, but also, of course, my friend has old school mango trees on his property that are quite fibrous and kind of have more of that, robustness and flavor. And they're small mangoes and large seeds and not a lot of flesh, but I love those too. And of course, modern mangoes are also more recently developed. And now let's get into a picture and share with you guys the difference between modern and cultivated mangoes. So this is from a published study. You guys could see number A, the lower one is on A is like a more modern sized mango. The first one, the top picture, it's kind of hairy. That's like all the fibers that are stuck. And some more mango cultivars related are B and C. These are much smaller fruits. I have an upcoming episode that I will air soon where we go over with a fruit expert who's a rare fruit tree collector, some of the different, mango and different genetics of wild fruits that he's growing and comparing them to their modern cousins, basically, right? So fruits have been changed a lot over the many years, once again, for human benefit. And usually it's for human benefit for profit, meaning, better mangoes sell better than ones that don't taste as good. This is another good picture, guys. Apples. Modern apples, the top row, you guys could see like Red Delicious, Granny Smith or whatever. And then as we get lower, the small ones, those are not cherries, guys. These are ancient apples. These are heirloom apples. Apples started out as being this small. Most of you guys have never seen this before. You could get crab apples, which I would recommend you guys buy whenever you see them. If you guys just plant an apple seed, you may get a tree and they may produce tart apples, but most people would call them undesirable. I call them nutritious and good to eat, right? But they're not as sweet. There's not as much flesh. There's a lot more skin area, which is actually where all the nutrients are concentrated. If you guys want to learn more about this, you want to read a book called Eating on the Wild Side. I have it in my Amazon shop for those of you guys that are interested in how basically we could select some modern variety that still have higher levels of nutrition than others, because most of the time, the nutrition in apples happens to be just a fluke because it wasn't, bred for the nutrition. It was bred to ship and sell because of the flavor. All right, this one's gonna piss some people off too, guys, but I'm telling the truth. Once again, this is from another published study. This is papayas. So of course, on the right side, you see the nice, huge hunkin' papaya that we're all used to, tons of seeds, lots of flesh. And as we move over to the left side, those little small things that look like little berries, those are more wild type papayas. Yes, they probably were very similar. They had much less fruit flesh. They had still a bunch of seeds, And then, you know, in the middle, that's kind of like a compromise between them, you know, a different type of papaya. But these are more wild fruits, guys, proving that, you know, modern fruits, once again, have been bred for humans to have a lot more fruit flesh because that's the part we desire and we like the most. Next up, here's a natural peach, 4000 BC, or what they would call an artificial peach of today. And you can see, of course, the size is significantly different. 100 millimeters for the modern fruit. The natural peach, 4000 BC, 25 millimeters, literally 1/4 of the size. It had a waxy skin. Modern peaches have a soft, edible skin that basically goes bad very fast if it's damaged or if they're ripe. It has 90% edible flesh on the new, new style peaches, and the old natural peach, 4000 BC, had 64% edible flesh. The old peaches had 36% stone, so a lot bigger stone. The new varieties have 10% stone. And then there's only 3 known varieties, only found in China. They're 71% water, 8.1% sugars, and 20.9% other. I want you guys to pay attention to that other part. That other part is things like fiber and nutrients, right? These days, peaches are 88.9% water, 27% juicier, 8.4% sugar, 4% sweeter, and 1.4% other. And you can see some of the minerals have actually gone up, and I'll be explaining that in just a minute. And nowadays there's over 200 varieties of different peaches. So guys, are we eating the fruit that we ate of yesteryear? I mean, you have to agree that we are totally not. Fruit of today is so much different than it is of yesteryear. Does that mean it's bad? I would say not necessarily, right? But we do need to compensate for the main differences. Once again, the loss of fiber, the loss of nutrition, are the main things, and maybe even the increase of the sugar. Next up, wild grapes are the size of blueberries, right? I mean, we have these nice large hunking grapes, table grapes. I hate table grapes with a passion. They basically bred out the flavor, even the sugar out of them. They taste like nothing. A good Concord grape are nice and small and have this amazing flavor, and wild grapes are super small and tiny. Fortunately enough, they are bringing flavor back to modern grapes with some of the new cotton candy and new hybrids, once again, that are seedless, right? I encourage you guys to eat seeded grapes. They are much more nutritious. I personally like to, eat wine grapes that have amazing flavors because those flavors are basically end up in the wine that they end up creating. But yeah, wild grapes, so much different than modern grapes. And I know a lot of people subsist on modern table grapes of today, which to me are, garbage. Next up are strawberries, right? Uncultivated strawberries are small, significantly smaller, and, a little bit bumpier. So like if you ever had like a wild alpine strawberry, like those things are amazing. If you tasted a wild alpine strawberry like the ones on the left side, they taste like a strawberry, like a modern strawberry times 10 in terms of flavor. Wow, this really tastes like a strawberry should taste. I want to freeze dry some wild strawberries actually. That'd be insane. And then the flavor is times 10, but the sugar is like maybe times minus like 5. Like it's like not sweet. You taste the strawberry, but it's not as sweet, right? Modern strawberries, they lose the flavor, increase the sugar, right? Which is insane. I mean, strawberries are still one of the healthiest foods because they are a berry, and I encourage you guys to eat berries despite their, lesser flavor. Try to get them as ripe as possible. I recently had some organic strawberries grown in Plant City, Florida. They were actually pretty good. I was surprised for being, retail, industrial grown strawberries, how good they actually were. This one's interesting, guys. So this is a wild cucumber over on the left side. They're spiny, and I've grown relatives of the wild cucumber, in my garden. And nowadays they're nice and smooth. Also, wild cucumbers can have some toxins in them that can actually get you sick and kill you, which have been bred out. Occasionally I grow some Armenian style cucumbers that have some of the genetics back in, and then they're bitter. So then you really have to be careful of the bitterness if you grow more wild type cucumbers, or if that gets bred in due to stress or in your garden. But yeah, that's a wild cucumber versus the modern cucumbers of today. These, and also too, of course, the wild cucumbers are quite small. Let's see, if you want to look up West Indy Burr Gherkin, that's more related to a wild type cucumber. And there's a few more wild types that I looked up over the years. I want to grow one because it's like actually a tropical vegetable that should grow really well. True, modern cucumbers don't typically do well in the tropics. They're a very weak plant. Also, too, when I've grown the more wild type cucumbers, like the achachas from South America, or I think it's called lady slipper, they don't get the powdery mildew as fast as my regular cucumbers in my garden. So, these wild crops are much more resistant because they've had to fend for themselves in nature. All right, so now let's get into some published studies on why does this all matter. So this is a published study, Nutritional Characteristics of Wild Foods. Do the diets of our closest relatives have lessons for us, by Catherine Milton, PhD, out of University of California, Berkeley. This was a published article in 1999. Link down below to these published studies that I'll be referencing. And I want to read this part of the study. Domesticated fleshy fruits, such as those purchased in American supermarkets, typically have an attractive appearance, considerable succulent pulp, and a few or no seeds. These fruits have been selectively bred for characteristics and for a very sweet taste. They appear highly superior to their wild counterparts in the tropical forests, which tend to have high seed to pulp ratio, a less pronounced sweet taste, and often an unappealing appearance. Unpublished observations. However, most non-human primates, including the line giving rise to humans, evolved eating wild fruits similar or identical to those primates eat today, not the cultivated fruits humans now eat. One important difference between wild and cultivated fruit is that sugar in the pulp of wild fruits tend to be hexose dominated, some fructose and considerable glucose, table 1, while that of cultivated fruits tend to be highest in sucrose, a disaccharide, right? In addition, this published study also goes into nutritional differences that are basically taking out of the published study and made some graphs. So let's look at my graphs of the differences. First graph is basically the minerals in wild versus cultivated fruit and leaves based on that published study. So you guys could see the wild leaves have a lot more minerals than the fruits, okay? That's the orange line and the blue line. And in some cases, right, the cultivated leaves and fruits have more of select minerals than others, right? So if we look at wild fruits grown in Samoa versus cultivated fruits in the US, in terms of potassium, you guys could see the cultivated fruits have less potassium than the wild fruits. But then if you look at the cultivated leaves, potassium has a lot more, and the potassium in the wild leaves is less. And then also looking at the phosphorus is lower in the wild leaves, but higher in the cultivated leaves. And then the calcium also has a different spectrum. Once again, cultivated fruit has less calcium than wild fruits. And of course, going to sodium, the wild fruits have more sodium than the modern fruits. And on magnesium, the cultivated fruits is literally off the chart in magnesium, and the wild fruits have less magnesium. So, what is going on here? Why are some things higher, some things lower? So what I'll say, as somebody who grows my own food and knows what, cultivated fruits are being grown with, they're being put on NPK fertilizer, right? Nitrous, phosphorus, and potassium. Those are the three main minerals that basically conventional farmers put on their crops. So now the plants will uptake abnormally high amounts of these minerals. And also, of course, in this case, magnesium was quite high in cultivated fruits, which I would say is abnormally high, So basically we're eating all these fruits that are basically abnormally high in certain minerals that basically industry is putting on so that the plants make the make leaves and also make the fruits, but also it's not in nature's or God's proportions. This is why I add things like rock dust to my garden, which is basically ground up rocks that have minerals in nature's proportions that I put into my ground so my plants could now absorb nature's proportions of minerals instead of absorbing man-made proportions, because man-made proportions are not being grown, once again, for our health. They're being grown because this is the fertilizer that industry determined to be used to make large yields, to make nice plump fruit, even though they have a very bad imbalance of minerals. And these are just a few of the minerals. We're not even counting all the different trace minerals, right? And this is why it's so important to grow your own food. This is the only way you can ensure that your plants and the fruit and vegetables you eat are going to have the proper amount of minerals in them when you don't use NPK fertilizer, but use broad inputs of different kinds of composts, rock dusts, kelp, and others into your garden, so your plants could have a much better balance of nutrition and also a better, sweeter, and even more saltier flavor. All right, next up, they compare the crude protein in wild versus cultivated fruit based on the study data as well as the leaves. So we have the wild fruits of Panama. You can see basically has like over 6 in the protein by dry weight. The cultivated fruits from the US had about 5, but then the wild young leaves in Panama had like 12. So looking at this graph, what does it tell you? Well, it tells you that fruits of nowadays has less protein than they should of wild fruits, but the leaves have more. So that's why it's very important. And our closest relatives, the bonobo monkeys and chimpanzees, which I have a video on, linked down below, they don't just eat fruit, they eat plenty of young leaves and shoots and other plant material because they know that that's where the minerals are. We have mineral deficient fruit these days, and that's a huge problem in the fruitarian community, especially if you're not eating enough vegetables, right? So eat your vegetables to get your minerals, guys. I mean, this study proves it. Also, of course, if you grow your own food, right, depending on the bricks of the food, right, the bricks also incorporates the protein. And the higher the protein, the more resilient your plants are against pests. If you have better soil, then your protein levels are going to go up. That's, of course, another reason to grow your own food. All right, guys, next up, we're going to compare vitamin C content from wild fruits, wild leaves, and cultivated fruits and leaves in the US. So the wild fruits in Panama, the vitamin C was fairly high. The wild leaves was a little bit higher. The cultivated fruits are lower in vitamin C, and the cultivated vegetables in the US have high levels of vitamin C. Guys, once again, this is why it is very important if you're eating all fruit or mostly fruit, right, to also eat your leafy green vegetables because they are higher in vitamin C. Vitamin C is an anti-aging vitamin, right, and also protective against different diseases, right? If you're just eating fruits, and especially depending on some fruits, have very little vitamin C, if any. Some fruits could have more. Bell peppers are one of the fruits that have the highest amounts of vitamin C, although many fruitarians might not eat a lot of bell peppers because they're not a sweet fruit. But I want you guys to eat your vegetables, which are significantly higher in vitamin C than wild fruits or wild leaves, or even the cultivated fruits that maybe have about half as much vitamin C as the wild ones, right? This is why diversity, is important. It creates resilience, not only in nature, but also within us. All right, next up, this is the most shocking graph from the whole study. So this is the last graph I'll share with you guys from that study, and this is the most revealing. I'm gonna go ahead and move my picture over here so you guys could see. But basically this goes over the proportion by weight of different kinds of fruit sugars in wild versus cultivated fruit. This is the big kicker, guys, of this whole episode. I'm glad you guys stayed to the end because you guys seriously care about your health, because people that just watch 5 minutes of this and then bail, they're not going to get this information, and this can literally nip you in the butt, or actually nip you in the mouth, actually, as you'll learn. But anyways, the fruit sugar profile is wild versus cultivated fruit based on the study data. They're testing some figs, some different kinds of figs, some different kinds of wild fruits against modern mangoes and papayas, right? That are cultivated. And you guys could see the glucose is basically the orange bar. So there's high levels of glucose in more wild fruits, mostly glucose actually. And then you can see the fructose. There's, less levels of fructose than the sucrose. And then you can see the sucrose, which is the green bar in the wild fruits, which is very little. Now, of course, there's going to be exceptions to this, but this is the study data that I have. And in general, I believe this to be true. And once again, I want you guys to be cautious about more wild cultivated fruits. So you could see in the cultivated fruits, right, the glucose, which normally should be a lot higher, is very low, right? The fructose, is fairly good. That's almost close to the normal range in wild fruits, closer. than the glucose. But so you can see the sucrose is dominated in the cultivated fruits, and of course the sucrose is the least amount in the wild fruits, right? So this is very interesting to know this. And, what effect does that have on us? Because, most people think, oh, sugar, 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 it's all absorbed the same way. Well, no, different sugars are absorbed differently. They feed different bacteria within us, right? Fructose is mostly dealt with by the liver. So, we typically don't want a lot of fructose, and that's why we don't want to eat agave syrup or other high fructose corn syrup, which has shown in published studies to be quite bad for us. So let's go to the next study to share why higher sucrose is probably not a good thing eating in excess. All right, so this last study I want to show you guys is a scientific report published 2018, and it's basically, the title is called In Vivo Shift of the Microbiota in Oral Biofilm in Response to Frequent Sucrose Consumption, right? I don't make this stuff up, guys, right? A lot of raw vegans I've known have had teeth issues, including myself. I just got a few more cavities filled just the other day. I mean, I brush my teeth regularly, water pick and floss regularly, but have still had some issues. And this probably stems from my many years of not having proper oral care. So make sure you guys see your dentist regularly to get cleanings, even if it's a holistic one. Make sure you take care of your teeth because you only get one set. Nonetheless, let's go down to the abstract of the study. In the summary, it says, the sucrose phase resulted in significant differences in beta diversity and significantly decreased species richness. It was marked by a significant increase in abundance of streptococci, specifically Streptococcus gordoni, Streptococcus parasinegus, and Streptococcus sanguis. Enamel surface roughness began to increase, reflecting initial impairment of dental enamel surface. The results showed that frequent sucrose consumption provoked compositional changes in the microbiota, leading to an increase of non-mutant streptococci, hence supporting the extended ecology plaque hypothesis and emphasizing the synergy of multiple bacteria species in the development of caries. So basically they fed people extra sucrose, and when they fed people extra sucrose, they basically made an explosion of certain bad bacteria in their mouth that then caused them to break down enamel and have more cavities, right? And basically imbalance their oral microbiome, because now these bacteria were dominating because they love to eat the sucrose, right? And the other bacteria that eat other things that we eat, right, were basically getting minimized because it was decreasing the population or the microbiota, right? It was decreasing the diversity of microbiota because certain species were dominating, right? And this is just in your oral microbiome. We're not even discussing our intestinal microbiome, where I personally have seen some shifts that I believe happened to me due to higher fruit consumption that I should have been eating. So, that is the repercussions of our modern fruit that we're getting. I mean, how can you, reverse this damage? Well, by eating more vegetables. I mean, I have a video linked down below to that, how you can improve your oral microbiota by drinking lettuce juice, right? This is why vegetables literally balance out the fruit that you eat, and it's so important to eat lots of vegetables, especially also have proper mouth care, all right? And we're not even, this is discussing published studies on the sucrose imbalance. We're not even discussing at this point, I don't even think they've done studies on the balance of, trace mineral imbalances, right? Or the other imbalances in lesser phytonutrients, or the other imbalances of different types and lesser amounts of fiber in, more wild versus cultivated fruits and modern fruits of today. All right, so it brings me to the last slide of our presentation today, which is what the fruit. This is thanks to Nutrition with Judy and going over, popular fruit eaten on a fruitarian diet, which is today's banana, right? 30 bananas a day is a popular diet. A lot of people chug down their bananas because they want to get their fruit calories, and fruit is good, but I think eating 30 bananas is quite excessive, and you should rotate your different fruits you're eating. I barely eat bananas unless I have really good ones, or unless there's absolutely nothing else to eat. I really despise them. They're a very low nutrient food. Anyways, it says today's bananas are hybrids of two wild bananas, Musa acuminata and Musa babylonica. These modern bananas are intentionally bred to be much sweeter, and you can see the wild banana, which I actually have seeds for and am trying to grow out myself. The first banana may have been cultivated 7,000 years ago in Papua New Guinea. These bananas were stocky and hard with large, tough seeds throughout the fruit's interior, guys. So a lot more fiber, a lot less fruit area, and those banana seeds, I've chewed into them, they are quite hard, right? So, this is literally where we are at today. You as a fruitarian, you have to agree that fruit today is different than it was when we literally became human on this planet. If you expect to eat like, ancient humans, go live out with the bonobos and find what they're eating and eat with them, I don't think anybody's going to do that. If you do, I highly respect you for doing that. That being said, what's the next best thing we could do? Well, number one is take responsibility for some of the food you eat yourself, grow your own fruit trees, try to find these wild and rare varieties of more wild type fruits. I have friends that are collectors that collect all the different kinds of rare mango varieties, right? So that they don't go extinct. They are growing them so they can enjoy them and pass them along to other people. That's number one, grow your own fruit trees, guys. Get varieties that are more like the original types. Of course, grow them not in monocultures, grow them in food forest style, adding different trace minerals in. Don't add the NPK to imbalance your different kinds of minerals in your soil. Also, I would encourage you guys to read a book called Eating on the Wild Side. Even with today's modern food system, the author of Eating on the Wild Side basically exposes the modern fruits of today and shows you guys how you could navigate the modern fruits to eat fruits that are more modern, but yet still have some higher levels of phytonutrients, and fibers like the older fruits did. The other thing, of course, I would tell you guys is because the modern fruit is not the same as wild fruit of yesteryear, a big way to compensate for that are the vegetables. As you guys saw in some of the last slides, the vegetables have some of the nutrients, fiber, vitamins, and minerals that modern fruit does not. This is why I'm such an advocate for eating vegetables, as a good portion of your day, along with your fruit. I do not recommend a 100% fruit diet. That will cause problems in the long run. Maybe in the short term, for a number of years, you could be good until basically you hit the plateau and you fall off the cliff. And then your health goes down. And once your health starts going down, when you're older, it's a lot harder to get back than when you are resilient and you're younger. This is literally, I'm sharing words from wisdom of living this lifestyle now for the last 31 years, So I want you guys to do the best you can and, eat a wider diversity of fruits, try to grow your own, eat lots of vegetables, include vegetables, and don't be scared of other plant foods to fill in for the nutritional gaps that modern fruit has. This is another one of the many reasons why I started incorporating small amounts of heat processed foods in my diet. If you guys want to learn about the heat processed foods I eat so I could reduce my fruit consumption, but increase other vegetables that can be a lot more nutritious than some of the fruit I am replacing. Links down below to those videos. In the end of this episode, I'm not here to dissuade you from eating fruit. I think fruit is great. I eat plenty of modern fruit. Most of the fruit that I eat these days are actually modern fruit, although I basically tread lightly and try to select the most healthiest modern fruits. I tend to eat lots of berries these days myself. And, there are certain kinds of, the white peaches and nectarines are typically more nutritious because of their deep red color than the orange ones. So I navigate certain fruits. Of course, I like other kinds of fruits too. Today I had bananas in my oatmeal this morning. So do the best you can. Don't get stuck on only eating fruits. Increase your diversity of fruits. Try to grow your own fruits. Visit farmers markets, visit farms, local farms, do you pick farms and grow your own food to increase the quality of even the more modern hybridized fruit that you guys are eating today, to do the best you can. And just be aware that there are more wild types that you can grow if you are a collector or want to start growing your own fruit trees yourself, so you guys could eat more like what they would have in the wild. And that's pretty much the summary of this episode. I really hope you guys enjoyed all my research, all my dedication to making these videos for you guys. If you guys did, please be sure to give this a big thumbs up. Also, more importantly, share this with other raw vegans and especially fruitarians that are eating mostly or almost all fruit, so that they could navigate around the pitfalls, not so that they could stop, but so that they could navigate around the pitfalls, so that they could also be healthy in the long term. Because I've seen a lot of things happen to a lot of my friends that are raw vegans over the years, and I don't want that happening to you. Also, be sure to click that subscribe button right down below so you don't miss my new upcoming episodes. I come here 5 to 7 days. You never know what will show up, what you'll be learning. on my YouTube channel to enhance your health and enhance your diet. Make sure you click the little bell so you get notified as many videos come out. And finally, be sure to check out past episodes. I've referenced a whole bunch of episodes in this video. I'll put the links in the description below so you could learn more about my thoughts on this style diet and how to optimize for the best health ever. So with that, my name is John Kohler with OKRaw.com. We'll see you next time. And until then, remember, keep eating your fresh fruits and vegetables, and especially wild ones. They're always the best.